Okay, welcome everybody. So I'll quickly do a recap like we do every week, and then move on to the lesson on spending. That's a very, very important lesson because that really drives a lot of the other stuff that we're talking about. Okay? We talked about the foundational principles, which is, what does the scripture say about God's part in handling money, and what does it say about our part in handling money? What we saw is that God is the owner of everything. So basically everything belongs to God, and this was an important principle for us to just be able to accept and live by. Secondly, God is in control, right? So He's a owner. He owns 100% of everything we have. So any decisions that we make, is really about spending God's money, not our own. He's in complete control. He's sovereign over every circumstance, over how much money we have, how much money we don't have, over whether we have a job, not have a job. And then He's the provider. So He has promised to provide, and He has promised to provide for our needs, right? Our food, clothing, and shelter. Very often, we are not very content with what we have, because we want a lot more than what we need, and God has promised, and we should be content as long as our needs are being met, right? We should be content with whatever God gives us, with whatever He gives us, we have to then meet our needs with that, right? And then what's our part in handling money? It's about this concept of faithful stewardship. So we should be faithful stewards of what belongs to God, and He has given it to us. A steward is a manager, right? It's a manager of the resources of somebody else, and you always have to think, keep this in our minds that it doesn't belong to me, right? And that means that I need to be very thoughtful about the decisions that I'm making. I need to be very thoughtful and prayerful about how I choose to spend the money, what I choose to spend it on. Because at the end of the day, I am just a steward of what God has given me. And that is true with everything. We're talking about money here, but it's money, our talents, our time, all the resources that we have. And God wants us to be faithful with little, and if we're faithful with little, He might bless us with more to steward on His behalf. We talked about debt and the dangers of debt, and how the debt lifestyle is something that really causes a lot of stress in life. As we know, paying off our EMIs, especially when the economic situation is not very good like it is right now, and things are getting worse, and people are losing jobs. Just this last week we found out about more folks in CBF who are losing their jobs, being laid off. That's what happens when the economy goes bad. And of course, if you have a lot of debt, when you're in that situation, immediately the stress levels go up. Okay, debt also causes us to deny reality. Okay, and it leads to financial bondage, because we are able to artificially increase our standard of living. Right, the debt allows us to, if we can meet those EMI payments, we are buying more and more stuff, which is gradually increasing our standard of living. It can be addictive. It presumes on the future. It deprives God of a chance to provide or deny. And it's a loss of opportunity, because you're spending a lot of money, servicing the debt that could be going towards meeting your needs, or saving for the future, or even giving back to the Lord. The part about presuming on the future, again, probably a lot of people, the economy has been good for the last 4 or 5 years, good increases, a lot of jobs, the market was hot. And we would have assumed in our minds, it's natural human thinking that in our minds we think, oh, this is going to continue forever, right? And we presume, and nobody even foresaw, right, that we're going to be in the situation we're in. Even I was just thinking back today, just in February, in the first week of February, myself and Brother John Verghese had gone to Polalkere for some meetings, and we were driving back, and that was like barely March, April, May, just 3 months ago, right? And yeah, we had sort of an inkling that there was this corona thing going around, but had no thought even at that time that and we talked about all kinds of things on the way there, on the way back, but never once did we think about any of this stuff, right? So it's just hit us all of a sudden. So it presumes on the future over which we have no control, right? James chapter 4, it says, for you who says today and tomorrow I will go here and there and do this and that and all that, it says, we are being fools to presume on the future and assume that things are just going to keep going the way they are today. So some key principles on debt. As we went through the scriptures, we want to be true to the scriptures here and apply principles, right, to come up with practices. So we found that debt is not absolutely forbidden, but it is strongly discouraged. And so the conclusion we can draw from this is being in a debt situation, a debtor situation, is not really something that is, that scripture views as a positive thing. It is not a wise thing, even though from a worldly standpoint, we are pushed towards it. It's not what God really desires, right? And we looked at all the verses. The scripture warns against debt. It shouldn't be normative, and we should make every effort to get out of debt. In the Proverbs, it talks about, if you have given, if you've taken a debt from a friend, you go, while it's still night, you go and pay him back, so that you're not remaining bondage. So when can we consider taking a debt? So first of all, the principle is that the item that we purchase, if we do decide after praying, and we went through some 12, 13 questions to ask ourselves, right, go into it very carefully, make sure that this is really what the Lord wants me to do. You use this filter here, right? So is the item that I'm purchasing on debt, is it appreciating, right? Is it an appreciating asset? Is it income producing? Is it likely to generate some income for me? Okay, like for example, it's for a business. But again, with a business, there's a lot of risk there. So you've got to make sure that you're covered, right? That you got the, that you have enough there to, to make an informed decision. The value of the item. So the value of the item, the value of what you're buying should exceed what you owe. So in other words, again, this means that, you don't take a loan typically on a depreciating asset, right? A loan where you're paying interest. You want to make sure that if something is worth 1,000 rupees, I don't owe more than 1,000, right? Or not even 1,000. Maybe I should only owe 400 or 500 on it, so that what I owe is less than what that item is worth. The size of the debt should not strain our budget. And we're going to talk more about budgets today when we get into the lesson on spending. Does not cause us to violate convictions, does not cause us to rob God of his due. So again, going into the debt should not reduce your commitment of what you're explicitly giving back to the Lord. It shouldn't restrict our response to the Holy Spirit's prompting to help others. In other words, it shouldn't put you in such a tight situation that you have nothing left over to help somebody. Okay, if your brother comes knocking on the door and he needs help and he's desperate, needs help for food, you shouldn't be so hard up that you don't have the capacity to do that. And then it shouldn't restrict your response to the Holy Spirit's call to move or to change. Okay, so I just want to address one thing, that came up in some of the questions, and that's about a loan for a house, right? So people say, can I take a loan for the house and all that? So let's just apply these principles. Again, it's never a yes or no. It's sort of a maybe, right? It's a let's think about it and decide what makes sense for me, right? So first of all, am I purchasing an item that is appreciating or income producing? So if you're buying a house, generally speaking, although again, you can't presume 100%, but generally speaking, the houses, housing, at least in the Indian market, tends to either hold its value or appreciate, right? Has been appreciating for a while. Maybe now we'll start, just staying stagnant. But generally speaking, it is sort of a appreciating or a safe sort of asset, right? Does the value of the item exceed the amount owed? So how do you apply this in this case of housing? Okay, what you need to look at is how much am I taking the loan for? Okay, so if the house is, I don't know, I'll just make up a number, 40 lakhs, or let's say 50 lakhs, that's the value of the house today. Okay, If I'm taking out a 50 lakh loan, that's very dicey, okay? Because what if tomorrow something happens, the market crashes, you're going to be in trouble, okay? You're going to have all of a sudden an asset, you're going to have a loan or liability against an asset with a value that doesn't cover that liability. So, you want to make sure that when you do, prayerfully decide to take a loan for housing, then you're able to at least pay a significant down payment. I would recommend at least about 20%, right? So in that case of the 50 lakh house, you want to put at least 10 lakhs down and only take a loan at most on about 40. If you can do more, you can put 20 down and take a loan 30. That's even better, right? Then the size of the debt does not strain your budget. So again, take a look at, okay, now I've got to make this EMI. How does that compare? I was paying rent before. So, is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? How is it going to impact my budget? Am I going to have to steal from what I give to the Lord? Maybe I've been convicted and I've gotten to the point where I'm able to give, say, 15% of my income to the Lord. Okay, now, because I take this debt on, am I going to have to reduce the 15 to 10? Okay, pray about that, right? Is that really what the Lord wants you to do? I tend to follow the principle that once I reach a certain level, that's a commitment I'm making to the Lord. And of course, it's not something you need to be legalistic about. Prayerfully, you can always bring that down, but think about it, okay? And then, the other point I would make is that second point is very important, because the value of the item should not exceed the value of the item should exceed the amount that you owe in the loan. And the reason that's very important is because should you get in a bind, okay, say 3 years down the road, the economy goes, you lost your job, you don't have the salary income to pay it off, pay off your EMI, then you always have the option then of selling that house, okay? And if it's got value and you've got a decent amount of equity in it, you will actually get some cash back, right? You have the option to sell it. If the value of that house at that point exceeds what you owe, sell it, pay off your loan, and then, go live with a relative or family member, or go live in a rented place, cheaper place, right? Downgrade. So it gives you those options. But if you are so extended, then you don't have those options, right? If you're buying something way beyond your means, you don't have that option, right? And also keep these in mind, that just because the EMI allows me to buy a house that's 1 crore, okay? Is that really the wise thing to do? Do I really need a house that big, right? What's the size of my family? Should I stick to a 2 BHK, or does it, when you start shopping, there's always this attraction, and the people who are selling the houses, they want to give you, why don't you get a 3 BHK? It only costs you another, 8 lakhs, 10 lakhs, whatever, right? And there's a temptation to do that, but always go back and follow these principles, okay? Apply these principles. So that's what I would say about taking a loan for a house. I hope that's helpful. Then we talked about giving. So what are the benefits of giving? So giving is giving a portion of our income, to the Lord, like a first fruits, like you're just setting aside something, okay? And it's acknowledging that God is the owner, okay? Saying, God, you're the owner, so I am going to sacrifice, I'm going to set apart, just as the children of Israel were called to set apart their first fruits of their crops, just as they were called to consecrate their firstborn to the Lord, right? So what are the benefits of giving? And increase the intimacy with the Lord. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It develops character, causes unselfishness. It creates that unselfish nature in you, where you're not sort of holding on to your money, and you're not hesitant to give to the needs of others, because we are called to be cheerful givers. It's investing for eternity, right? Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust do corrupt. Increase in material blessings, that we looked at this passage, where the Lord has promised that He will bless us, He will meet our needs, but then we have to respond to it by increasing our giving, right? So when the Lord blesses you financially, you give more, and it meets the needs of the saints. 2 Corinthians 9:12-14, where the saints are encouraged, they abound in thanksgiving to the Lord, and then they pray for you and me. when their needs are met through us, right? And that is a tremendous blessing in our lives when we have saints praying for us. So we looked at tithes and all that. So what do we say is the principles for how much we should give? The tithe is a good, the tithe is a good starting point, and should be the minimum that we give. Our goal should be to increase our giving beyond the tithe. Okay, and I would suggest that we determine a fixed percentage, whether that's where you are today, it's 5%, 8%, 10%, whatever. If you can make it to 10 just yet, work your way up towards it. Once you're at 10, as your income starts increasing, as you start getting those increments, maybe you make a commitment to the Lord, says, Lord, whatever increment you give me, half of that I'm going to add to my giving. Okay, or maybe more. So that allows you to increase that percentage and then hold to it, right? As your income grows, you keep increasing. And then you need to give off all your income, right? Whether your salary, your bonuses, your appreciation, your interest that you get from the bank, on your deposits, the gain on your investments, any increase, right, that the Lord gives you, you give of that to the Lord. Apply that percentage. So we talked about all the things, the man's approach and God's approach, to this, and then so we've already addressed all of these things. I'm not going to spend time on it. It's more blessed to give than to receive. So God's ways are not like man's ways, right? And I just want to address one point about giving before we move on, and that is, there was a lot of questions about giving to other believers, right? So, if a believer comes and he keeps, if there are believers who sort of make a habit of going around to different people, this question took different forms, but it was something like, if they keep coming all the time, should we give? The general principle is that, God wants us to give to our brother or sister in need. Okay, but that does not mean that we have to be unwise about it. If a brother is repeatedly coming, you should, first of all, you need to understand and try to understand what is the real need. Okay, why is this brother or sister needing money? Why is it that they are continuously in need? Okay, if somebody comes one time, they have a particular need, okay, but then if this happens repeatedly every couple of months, that means there's a serious problem, either in terms of how they're managing their money, they're not very wise about it, or they're spending too much. So it's always wise to do it, not to be nosy, but to help the brother, or take the brother to somebody who can advise him to look at his whole situation and understand what are the root causes for why this person needs this money, right? Is it, of course, if they all of a sudden lose their jobs and they have a need, we understand, right? But when things are normal, maybe there's something else going on, right? Maybe they've made some unwise decisions. Maybe they're continuing to make unwise decisions. So certainly the obligation or the duty we have to give to the needs does not mean that we're not applying wisdom to it. It doesn't mean that, we want to help our brother and sister come out of financial bondage, not feed their financial bondage. Okay. So, and if you need help with this, if you really feel like someone is asking and they're going sort of out of bounds, please do check with us, okay, in the church context, check with the elders so that we can intervene, and try to just understand what's going on in that person's life, right? And maybe direct the giving in a way that also helps him deal with those issues. Says, I'll take everything you got, and he's got his credit card up. Okay, so this is the mentality of the world. I've got a credit card, I've got a piece of plastic, I can afford it, let me buy it. Okay, but that's not what the Bible teaches. So when we talk about spending, it completely, at the end of the day, it all boils down to lifestyle. Okay, and lifestyle is a choice. Okay, you and I make a choice of what kind of a lifestyle we're going to have. Okay, whether it's an expensive lifestyle, a reasonable lifestyle, a cheap lifestyle, whatever. Okay, and this is something that ultimately drives a lot of decisions. Okay, it drives whether we go into debt. Okay, it drives how much we give. Right, it pretty much drives. It sort of underlies all the financial decisions that we make. Whatever desires we have for lifestyle, it drives kind of clothes we buy, the kind of car that we want to, that we purchase, the kind of vacations that we have, the kind of travel that we do. Everything is driven by our lifestyle choice. So what are some principles to apply for a Christian from Scripture with regard to our lifestyle? So let me just go over these 5 principles here. Sorry, there's more than 5. There's actually 10 of them. So we'll go through them quickly. So number 1, we have to think with an eternal perspective. Okay, so the culture and the media implores us to focus on the immediate, right? So focus on today. So the question that, focus on your life here, right? So for a Christian, our life on earth is very brief, okay, compared to eternity. So if you were to draw a timeline, the time that we are on this earth, 60 or 70, 80, 90, whatever number of years is like a dot, okay? On the timeline of eternity, it's just a dot. It's insignificant, right? So we have an opportunity, as it says in Matthew 6:19, where it says, pursue the eternal treasure and not the worthless earthly treasure. Okay, we have an opportunity to influence eternity by how we handle our money today. So when you spend money to influence people for Christ, okay, so you trade temporal possessions that you could even afford, perhaps, okay, given your income, you trade those possessions that we can't keep them anyway, right? So Job said, right, naked I came into the world and naked I leave, right? There's nothing that you can take with you, right? There's an old saying in the US, there's a company in the US called the U-Haul. Those of you who have some experience with America, U-Haul is a rental. You can rent trucks or a little, a little thing that you can attach to your car to store all your goods. And typically, when you move, I know that when I moved from Texas to Alabama, I hired a U-Haul truck and loaded it up with my earthly possessions. At that point, it fit within one little U-Haul truck, and you can attach your car to the back of it and drive the truck along, or you can get a little thing that you attach. So there's an old saying that, I never saw a U-Haul attached to a hearse. Okay, a hearse is the little car that takes the coffin to the cemetery, and the saying is that I never saw anybody whose body is being carried in a hearse have a little U-Haul container attached to it, taking along his earthly possessions. So when you die, your earthly possessions goes to somebody else. Okay, so we need to trade our temporal possessions that we cannot keep anyway to gain eternal possessions that we cannot lose. Okay, so think with an eternal perspective. Okay, when you choose your lifestyle, sacrifice things on earth because our perspective is eternal. Remember that you are a pilgrim. Okay, so Philippians 3:20 says that we are citizens of, you are citizens of heaven, right? We are not earthly minded. We are not supposed to be earthly minded. 2 Corinthians 5:20 says we are ambassadors representing Christ on the earth. Okay, so we are ambassadors of Christ. We belong to another kingdom, another country. Hebrews 11:13 says that we are aliens, strangers, and pilgrims on the earth. So what is a pilgrim? A pilgrim is a traveler. He's not a settler. Okay, he doesn't put roots anywhere. He lives in a tent. I'm not saying all of us should go and live in tent. It's a principle of the pilgrim here. Okay, a pilgrim mentality, right? So, but the way that a lot of believers, the lifestyle they choose, the decisions we make, it seems like, they're going to be living forever and ever and ever, okay, on the earth. I mean, you look at how many houses they have. They have the house they live in, they have a rental flat here, and a lot of and these are not, go to non-believers, they have those, right? When I talk to my colleagues, every one of them has got at least 3 flats, okay, the one they live in, and 2 somewhere in the city that they're renting, all right, and I have none. Is that because I can't afford 2 flats? No, it's because, that's just not the mentality that we as believers ought to live in, right? You have a place to live, but, putting roots, in the ground that, and we come up with all kinds of things. I remember when we had a property in Kerala, the ancestral property, and, after my father died, my mother decided to come and stay with us, and, I immediately got rid of it. And people were like, oh, it's your ancestral property. You don't have any heritage. If you give it up, then, oh, I wish we had, I was like, our heritage is in heaven. It's not sitting in a piece of land in Kerala. Okay, so, we need to keep this pilgrim mentality and not, not excessively accumulate things on the earth that can distract us from reaching the goal or the destination. A pilgrim always travels light. Okay, a pilgrim travels with whatever he can fit in his tent and whatever, the old days pilgrims in Abraham's day, whatever you can fit on the back of the camel, right? So travel light through life. So material possessions are only valuable to a pilgrim as they facilitate his mission. Okay, so here you have a lot of questions on needs and wants. How is this what I'm going to spend the money on, or a choice I'm making? How is it going to facilitate my mission? Okay, in life. Now, if somebody is investing in something to make some money to support missions work, that's a different thing than you're investing to earn a living, okay, or earn a lot of income for yourself. Okay, so think about. So that's where I'm saying it's not that it's right or wrong. Maybe there's a believer who wants to give a lot to the Lord, and he decides, I'm going to buy 5 flats, and I'm going to rent them out, and all the income that comes from it, I'm going to give to the Lord. Okay, perfectly fine, right? So it depends on your mentality and why you're doing it, and does it really facilitate your mission that the Lord has given you. Make an effort. Make an effort to live simply. Okay, so too many or the wrong types of possessions can demand a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money, and they harm our relationship with the Lord and with others. Okay, so we are called to lead. 1 Thessalonians 4:11-12. We have to lead a quiet and peaceable and simple life. Okay, the Lord has called us to be simple people. And I think as believers we need to be simple. Okay, simple in what we spend money on, simple in how we choose how we spend our time. Simple in the kind of purchases we make. Simple even in the vehicles we drive. Again, it all ties back to the pilgrim mentality. Remember that we are soldiers at war. So 2 Timothy 2:3-4. You therefore must endure hardships as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. So being in war calls for altered lifestyle. Okay, it means that you spend less on comforts. Right? So as soldiers, we should be careful not to become unduly encumbered with the cares of this life. In Hebrews chapter 12, it talks about shedding the weight that so easily entangles us. Right. So we have a lot of entanglements in this life. Okay? Some of it is our finances and our properties. I have this EMI there, or I have this property there. I got to take care of this there. And it takes up all your time taking care of all your properties that you have. Right. So we are soldiers at war. Then the other principle of choosing a lifestyle is to recognize the enemy. Okay, for we do not wrestle, Ephesians 6:12, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. So what is the devil's mission? The devil's mission is to divert us from serving Christ. And he accomplishes this by tempting us to serve money. Okay, that's why Jesus said you cannot have two masters. You cannot serve mammon and God, right? So Matthew 6:24 is where that's from. You cannot serve both God and money. So serving money is difficult to identify because people praise you for the sin of loving money. Okay, so we just need to think of these principles. Keep as you make those choices. Okay, they're every day making choices on our lifestyle. You're making choices on where I'm going to live. You're going to make choices on the kind of clothes I'm going to spend money on. You're making choices on, what kind of property you're going to buy, where you're going to eat, what you're going to spend on, where you're going to send your kids to school, all these things, right? But think with these things in mind. Think with an eternal perspective. Remember that you are a pilgrim. Make an effort to live simply. Remember that we are soldiers at war. Recognize the enemy. Okay, he tempts us to serve money. Okay, let's 5 more principles. We have to spend in a way that pleases the Lord. So that means prayerfully submit decisions to the Lord. Okay. Now, so there's a lot of questions around how do I know between needs and wants. Okay. And by the way, I don't believe that God is such a, I don't know what adjective to use here, but God is the kind of God that doesn't want us to have some pleasures. Okay, He wants us to have some pleasures. It's just a matter of whether you're living a pleasureful lifestyle or you're going to the Lord. Yesterday, Rebicha and I were speaking with a brother and sister from right here in CBF. Okay, and we were just asking, well, what can we pray for? And at the end of it, he said, well, you know what? I'd like you to pray for something because I've been praying for it. And he goes, it might seem like a small thing, but I pray for everything. Okay, I pray for even small things. And we said, okay, what is that? And he said, you know what? My wife and I and our kids, we haven't really had a real holiday. We haven't had a vacation in many years because we've not been able to afford it. Okay, and I'm trying to save up some money, and I'm praying that the Lord would make provision for us to do it. It's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, if you look at its strict definition, is it a need or a want? Yeah, it's probably not a need, but I don't think what the Lord doesn't want us to splurge. I see people who are traveling to all kinds of overseas exotic locales and spending, lakhs of rupees every year. That's not what this brother and sister wanted. They just wanted to take a little break, okay? And they were not doing it for some period of time because they couldn't afford it, all right? And they wanted to pray and ask the Lord. And sometimes the Lord will provide in miraculous ways when you ask Him. Okay? So we don't have to put ourselves in a box on this and be very strict. It's not about having a checklist that says, oh, this is okay, this is not okay, right? So when you're giving to the Lord, when you're living a lifestyle that's not outside of your means, when you're not frivolously spending on things that you don't need, the Lord gives you a little money to go on a holiday, by all means go on a holiday, right? And it comes down to how you do that, right? So just to use the holiday example, it was last year, I think, we hadn't gone on a holiday for a while. Okay? We had been on a trip to the US because we had to go for some reasons a few years ago. But last year I felt, we need to go for a holiday. So we decided that, after doing some checking around and all that, we said, okay, we'll just go to Goa. We like the beach. We'll go to Goa. So, of course, the next question is, how do we get there? And the next question is, where do we stay? And, we could have all flown. Okay, I could have afforded to pay for, 6 air tickets to fly to Goa. It would have been very convenient. But we didn't do that. We took the bus. Okay, we took the bus over there and we took the train back because we couldn't afford it. No, because there was no need for it, right? We could have stayed at an expensive resort, but instead we, Lisa went and found some cheap place on Airbnb. It looked very nice on the website. When we got there, it was like 2 little rooms, next to each other. Well, that was fine. Okay, there was a small little swimming pool in the thing. It was walking distance to the beach. And every time we would go out to eat or something, we would walk by this big, fancy Taj property. Okay, and I've lived in Taj properties, due to my work and all this kind of thing. And, could I afford it to go and spend 1 week at the Taj there? I could have. Okay, but again, we chose not to do that because, I didn't think that was necessary. It certainly wasn't necessary for us to have a relaxing time. But we felt we needed to do it. And we spent, on a budget, a certain amount of money, and we did that. So that's the, that's the point about spending in a way that pleases the Lord. And we need to just keep watching what we're doing here. Okay. Then do not waste, right? So we have a lot of waste in our lives. When you buy something, and this is something that I try to teach the kids, whether it's wasting clothes, wasting toys, wasting food, do not compare yourself to others. Okay, so this is a tendency we always have. The people that I work with, well, they buy more, they drive more expensive cars, they live in bigger houses, and this is a big American thing. You always want to compare. Right? They've got a 3-bedroom, I need a 4, and so on and so forth. So don't dictate your lifestyle based on the maximum that you can afford. Okay? Don't dictate your lifestyle based on the maximum that you can afford. Your lifestyle should be based on the conviction that the Lord wants you to have a certain standard of living. Okay? And again, I'm not going to define what that is. That's something for each of us to come to terms with the Lord. Do not desire more than what the Lord has given you. So do not desire more power, more prestige, more wealth than the Lord has allowed you to have. Because remember, core principle, He is in control of everything. Being used by Christ has nothing to do with high position or great riches. It has everything to do with our willingness to let Christ control our lives. Okay, and then final principle, it's overarching. Do not be conformed to this world. Okay, and if I look at the Amplified Bible here, it says, I'm not sure. Okay, the Amplified Bible says, do not be conformed to this world, this age, fashioned after and adapted to its external superficial customs. So do not be fashioned after and adapted to the external superficial customs of the world. So that might apply to fashion, that might apply to all manner of things. Okay, I mean, if I can just use an example, I think I used this a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week. I've got to wear business suits, okay, to certain things and meetings that we have. It's considered part of the uniform. Now, I could go and spend 2 lakh rupees on a tailored business suit, okay. You can get them for that much. It all depends on the quality of the cloth and all these kind of things. Or I can make the business suit out of a much cheaper cloth, might cost a few thousand rupees. Okay, these are the kind of choices that we have to make. The fact that I need a suit, for me, it's a need. Okay, it's a requirement of my job, and my company pays me enough to make sure that I've got a certain number of suits and I dress decently when I go and meet with customers, or customers come over to see us here in India or whatever. Right, or I go to business meetings, but I make the choice on, I get to make that choice on how much am I going to spend on that, right? So whether I buy a 2 lakh suit or a $10,000 suit, it doesn't really look all that different. Okay, it doesn't make me any more qualified, doesn't make me any more important, it doesn't impress the customer anymore. And yet people, because they've chosen a certain lifestyle, there are certain people who will go for only that 2 lakhs, and they won't even tolerate spending less. Okay, whether it's the kind of phone that we have, right? How much you spend on a phone, because it's a status symbol. Okay, in fact, somebody made a joke that that the price for an Apple iPhone, the price is actually a feature. Okay, it's like a feature, just like any other feature. So in other words, the price can't go below a certain level. So if the price is below that level, then it's missing that feature, right? Because it's a status symbol. It's something that people think, oh, he's got an iPhone X, okay, or an iPhone 11, whatever the latest one is. So we should be conformed to the world. We should spend in a way that pleases the Lord, and I hope that as you go through these principles, that you can get a sense of how you make those decisions. Okay, so as I said, in this class, we're not going to tell you this is right or this is wrong. It's all sort of coming together in balance. Okay, how much has the Lord given me? Okay, how am I choosing to spend it? What kind of a lifestyle am I maintaining? How much am I giving to the Lord? And how does this all tie together? And is that glorifying God to the extent that I need to? So these are all personal decisions we can make, and these are principles that that we can apply to getting there. Okay. How then do I budget? So spending, the way you control spending is by budget. Okay. What is a budget? A budget this is something that is very simple, and yet most people, if I ask them, do you have a budget? Some will say, no, not really. I just spend, when I have money, I spend it. Okay. Others will say, yeah, I have one, but it's somewhere in my head. Okay. And so then you ask them, well, how do you know if it's in your head? Did you exceed your budget last month, or did you spend less? They won't know, right? So you've got to be very deliberate about this and have this plan, right? So a budget is a plan for spending money. It allows us to really track. Okay. So you set a budget, and then you track how am I doing, right, against that budget. Am I spending more? Am I spending less? Am I saving more, right? And this is a very common, a common technique. Businesses use it every year. For my business, for my company, we do a budget at the corporate level, and then it gets pushed down to all the strategic business units, and then I push it down to my business units, and everybody has a budget. That's the plan that we target, and then we figure out what do I have to do, to meet this plan, right? And then every month we track to say, well, are we doing better? Are we doing less? If we're doing better, does that mean that there's some room to make some more investments? If we're not, then what do I need to cut? I need to cut some costs to get back on track. So it really allows you to do that on an ongoing basis. So why should we have a budget? Okay, well, number one, it's the only way to follow through and apply what we have learned. Okay, so it's to apply biblical principles, right? So we have learned all these biblical principles. When you sit down on a piece of paper, on a spreadsheet these days, to build a budget, it allows us to say, am I applying biblical principles? Okay, how much am I giving? Okay, does this align with the principles that I've studied for giving? How much am I spending on food? Okay, how much am I spending on rent? Does it align with the biblical principles that that I've learned? Okay, does this budget allow me to pay off my debt and get out of debt, because being in debt is not a good thing? Does this budget allow me to save? Does this budget allow me to give while meeting my basic needs? And then it allows us to control our expenses. So we can always look at the budget and say, oh, you know what, I'm spending too much, right? That's why I end up having to go and ask money from somebody. So I need to cut back. Okay, so it helps you do that. It allows us to control spending and to reach our financial goals. So if you have goals that say, you know what, my wife is pregnant, we're going to have a baby soon. Okay, I need to pay for her delivery. Or I've got a 2-year-old child, he's going to go to school next year, okay, or the year after. Am I saving enough to pay the deposit on his school admission? And budgeting provides an opportunity to pray. So when you make spending decisions, you have to do it prayerfully. And just because you have a budget, by the way, it doesn't mean that, oh, it's within the budget so I can spend it. You still need to make those decisions prayerfully, okay? I remember I had an old boss, that was a very tight guy, and he would, so as I said, we had this budget that we had at the beginning of the year, and then, we would, so the budget said, I can spend, I don't know, so many rupees on, so many dollars on some training or something, right? And then we'd spend it, and then, it would come for some review, and he'd say, well, why do you spend that? And then, some people would answer, well, it was in the budget. And he made the statement, he said, a budget is not a permission to spend, okay? And he would say, did you come and get my approval? And the answer was, no, I didn't get your approval because it was in my budget. And I still remember the statement. He said, well, just because it's in the budget, it's not a permission to spend, okay? You still need to come and get my approval to spend what's in your budget, okay? So the point is that just because something is in your budget, you still need to go to the Lord, and you need to prayerfully take a decision on whether I should spend on this or that. Okay, so that's the what a budget is, and let's just go through the process of budgeting. Okay, so basically there are multiple steps here. Okay, so the process of budgeting, step one. Okay. So, by the way, all of you know how to use spreadsheets, so I would encourage you to take a spreadsheet and do this, okay? And don't try to do it in your head, all right? Begin where you are today. So you first sit down and say, you know what, where am I spending my money, okay? How much am I spending on rent? How much spending on transport? How much am I spending on food? On this, EMIs I have. Put all that down, okay? So determine your current expenses, okay? Determine precisely how much money you earn today, right? So it's not just your expenses, but also your income, right? And keep a record. So what you need to do is you start, keeping a record of all your expenditures. And there are some apps nowadays where you can just, when you spend the money, even if you're paying cash, you just put it in there and you can categorize. So you come up with some 8 or 10 categories, and categorize it. Okay, determine the monthly income that you have from all sources and record it. Okay, wherever I'm getting income from, I put it in there. So you reduce your monthly income by taxes and other automatic expenses. So you take out, the things that you have no choice over. You got to, if you're within a tax bracket, you got to pay the government. Okay, determine non-monthly expenses. So, for example, you have some things that you might pay once a year. Okay, maybe it's your insurance, maybe it's your vacation. Okay, and you divide that by 12. All right, put that as a line item in your budget. So the reason for that is that allows you to save up money for the need that you know is coming in the future. So your budget should not just be what I need to live today, but it's also things that I know happen once a year. Okay, because sometimes we get to that point in the year where we have to pay for the car insurance. Okay, I don't know if car insurance is paid here monthly or annually. Let's assume it's done annually. Okay, you get to November where it's due and you don't have money saved up. But if you divide that up by 12 and you're saving aside a little bit every month and you're not touching it, then when November comes, you've got a little kitty from which you can pay that, right? So determine monthly income from all sources and determine non-monthly expenses. Put that in your budget. Reduce from your income the taxes. Reduce from your income the amount of giving based on the principles of giving. So if you are determined that you're going to give 10% from your take-home pay, you take the 10% out, put that under the giving category, okay, set that aside, right? And then you complete your estimated budget. So it's quite possible that the first time you do this, your expenses are going to end up looking higher than your income, okay? Don't be discouraged. So what do you do next? Then you go to step 2, figure out how do I get where you want to be, okay? And this happens in the corporate world as well. Every year, all of my business unit leaders, they come to me. So we give them a target and inevitably they'll come and I have like 3 reviews with them. Okay. They'll come with the first one is way out of whack. Okay. And I know they all play this little game where they think that if they come to me with a budget that's way above the target, then I'll give them some leeway. So I look at that and I say, well, we can afford this. Go figure out how you're going to reduce cost, come back and they'll come back the second time. It'll still be a lot better, but not quite there, right? So it takes about 3 times for them to finally get the idea that, we can only afford so much, okay? So you got to get to the target. So similarly, keep looking at it and questioning, do I really need to make this expense? Okay, do I have ways to increase my income? Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. And so you try to get this budget down to where you want to be. Okay, and you might have to make some tough choices. Okay, and in step 1, you need to log everything you spend. Okay, so even all the money you're spending on buying expensive coffee from Starbucks or Coffee Day, just the snacks that you buy that you don't need, log all your expenses so that you know where you are today. Okay, and then step 3, okay, you start controlling your actual expenditure. You stick to the budget. That's why I said you've got these apps where you can put your budget, you can put how much you're spending as you're spending it, you record it, and you ensure that your actual expenditures are staying within the budgeted limit. So if, for example, you're so tight this month that some expenses come up that you didn't expect, then you need to cut from somewhere else to meet that expense. Okay, you need to not go out to eat so much. Okay, you need to eat, stop eating non-veg. Okay, unless, as Ajit says, non-veg is cheaper than veg, which I still find hard to believe, Ajit. Set aside monthly allotments for non-monthly expenses so that money is available when payments come due. So I talked about this. Consider putting that to a separate account. So I'm saving this up for that once a year expense that's going to come in September or October. Okay, so do not stop. So keep doing this again and again. Okay, and then again, once a year, if you've got a job and you get your increment, you go and reset your budget and you say, what am I going to do? And you look at it and say, nothing much has changed. Okay, I was single last year. I'm still single. I didn't have any kids last year. I still don't have kids. Or I had 1 kid. I still have only 1 kid. Nothing has changed. So, I really don't need to increase my lifestyle, okay, this year. So what am I going to do with the extra money? Maybe I'll give more of it to the Lord. Okay, maybe some of it I'll save because, I know I plan to get married and I have to move into a flat. I got to pay a deposit for that, right? I got to save up for the deposit. So what the budget really allows you to do is put everything down. It gives you a clear plan. It gives you a way to control your expenditures. It helps you make very wise financial decisions. Okay, so you should also think about ways to increase your income. Okay, maybe there are part-time jobs. Maybe there are home-based businesses that involve the family. Use extra income that you get to balance the budget, not for new expenses. So if you're struggling in an area, use that new expense to meet that. Okay, or maybe you're spending more, you're having to borrow. Get rid of the debt. Okay? Do not consider options that contradict your priorities. So don't try to get income by working so many hours somewhere else. That's going to harm your relationship or family. Maybe there are times where you have to do it for a season. Okay, that's understandable. But don't do things that's going to take time away from serving the Lord. Okay. All right. So I'm going to. So that's the increasing income part. And the other way to make your budget balance is by decreasing your expenses. All right. So what do you do? How do you do that? First of all, you evaluate every expense. Do I really need it? Okay. Now, this is something you can do, especially if your budget is not in balance. Okay. So eliminate unnecessary expenses, reduce other expenses that can't be eliminated, eat out less, go around, spend less money on petrol or diesel by going out less or walking or taking public transport. Differentiate between needs and wants. Okay, so needs are necessary expenses. Wants involve choices about quality of goods. Okay. So, for example, a used car may be sufficient to meet the need for transportation, but a new car would be a want, right? And then the third one is desires, okay? Choices that can only be made out of surplus funds after all the obligations have been met. So these would be things like vacations, trips, okay? Some amusement thing, okay? So, keep looking at everything and differentiate, right? You focus on the needs. Only after the needs are met with the most basic do you go to the wants, and only after those are met, you prayerfully go to the desires, and you don't want to overdo the desire part either. As I said, you want to go out with your family and spend a couple of days somewhere, nothing wrong with that, right? It's all a matter of, are you in balance, right? Are you doing that at a time when you're not able to meet your basic needs, when you're overspending your budget, when you're not giving to the Lord, right? When your financials are completely out of control, right? That doesn't make any sense, okay? For you to be jetting around the world, taking flights and going to resorts, and you're having to borrow. Okay? I've heard of people who have borrowed money to go on holidays. Okay, that makes absolutely no sense at all. You don't go borrow to meet your desires, okay? Evaluate your major expense categories based on the percentage guidelines. So I'm going to give you some percentage guidelines, and these are just guidelines, so we'll talk about that now. So here are the percentage guidelines. So here are the main expense categories, and you can see here, I've sent this out to you in your notes. So housing, okay, 25 to 30%, food, 10 to 15%, transportation, and so on and so forth, right? So these are some expense categories, and they help to, they're sort of like guardrails, okay? So it helps you to figure out, let's say you're renting, okay? How big of a place should I rent? Okay, use this as a guideline. So you know what, I shouldn't do more than 25 to 30% of my, take-home pay. Okay, so this is after giving and taxes. So this is take-home, which already, they take the taxes out of that, minus your giving, right? Whatever is left, okay, of that 25 to 30%. Okay, food. Okay, so it helps you to make the decision, what kind of place should I rent? Okay, is it a PG? Is it a 1 BHK? Is it whatever, right? Again, based on need. It also helps you when you're going to EMI. Okay, so rent, EMI, you can look at it in the same way, right? How much of an EMI, how much of my monthly income should I spend on EMI for a flat or a house? Okay, so these are the things. So I just did a little illustration here. If you take somebody who's got 40,000. I just picked a number that seemed reasonable for somebody, not at a very senior level. So 40,000 a month, let's say. Okay, you're getting 40,000 a month take home after you're giving. So let's say you're giving 10%, so you make about 44,000 take home, right? And you've given about 4,000, 5,000, whatever, and you're left with 40,000. Okay, so applying these guidelines, how much should you spend? Okay, I shouldn't spend more than 10 to 12K on my housing. Okay, now if that means I got to get a place, share it with 3 guys that some of you are doing, that's what you should do, right? I shouldn't spend more than 4 to 6K on food. So I should go and buy the groceries and cook myself and not eat out every day, spending few hundred rupees a meal, right? That's not going to keep me within the budget for a month. Okay, transport, right? Insurance. Some of these may not apply, but clothing, right? So when you have something like this that you've set up, and by the way, you don't have to have all these categories. These are just, I just picked this up from a book that I was reading, and I used to study for this. School, right? So that should drive what kind of school I can afford. Okay, investment. So notice a couple of ones I'll pick out. Okay, debts and investments. So notice that the range there is 0 to some number. Okay, the point there is that you don't do those unless, okay, that should be 0 unless you have something left over in your budget. Okay, after meeting all the essential things to actually go and do that. Okay. So these are just some guidelines to follow. This is not like the 10 commandments. Okay, thou shalt not exceed 25 to 30%. But some guidelines that if you were to use them, you will hopefully be able to get some control over the financials in your life. Okay, so what is man's approach to spending? It's to acquire as many expensive possessions as possible because they are evidence that you are a successful and important person. What is God's way? It's that the excessive accumulation of possessions will distract you from fulfilling God's purpose for your life. Okay? So I know that's a lot of stuff that we covered there. I won't. I guess I'll stop here and maybe we can. All right. I think we are out of time. We will continue to do the pigeonhole and keep questions coming. So does anybody have any final thoughts or any questions they want to ask? All right. Everybody have a good afternoon, good lunch, and we'll meet again next week.